Welcome, one and all, to the Success Curious podcast. It's your man, Andy, here, and I am delighted. Each time I seem to be starting these episodes, it all of a sudden hits me that I am rather privileged to be in the presence of people that have got a level of intellect that really does make me question some of my decisions earlier on in life. Anyway, I am absolutely delighted to be joined today by the incredible Cherie Mylordis. Now, Cherie is a leadership coach and founder of Nextgenify, who has a tremendous focus and really did pop onto my radar in a big way when I started hearing and really digging into how she articulates the way that leadership should be foreseen as of today, given the varying different degrees of motivation and the different ways in which people are really sort of set up these days when it comes to what they want out of life. She is a professional of some years and has spent time operating in different fields, such as the Sydney Olympics, which, as you all know, me being a bit of a sports nut, definitely perked my interest. Cherie, it's an absolute delight to have you on the show. How are you today?
I'm really good, Andy, and thank you for having me. And hello to all of your listeners. I think this is going to be a great conversation.
Oh, you know what? You and me both. I think we could wax lyrical for a wee while because we had a bit of a chat a few days before we set this up, team, and because I hadn't had a chance to actually speak to Cherie directly, but it was I discovered within a matter of moments that Cherie's one of my favorite types of people who really does tend to have a level of intellect that is absolutely incredible and an observational ability that is just beyond measure. And yet you very much feel like someone that would be able to connect with anyone, which I think is just fabulous. So, Cherie, before we crack on though, and get into the meat and veg of this, give everybody a bit of an MO as to who you are and what Nextgenify is all about.
Sure. Well, thank you. That's very lovely to hear those words after that short conversation. And it is all about building connection quickly, I think, and being authentic. So about me, well, yes, I guess a leadership coach is probably the best way to describe what I do. What I do is quite broad, but it comes down to being passionate about making the world of work better for people and organizations. And the reason why I'm passionate about that is because I've had a diverse career and I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. And the reality is, most people feel pretty stuck and disengaged. And I think that's because the world of work is actually designed from a different era. You can trace it back to 100 years ago, that industrial revolution, that command and control and that hierarchy. And so I help leaders at all levels rethink how we work so that people really can do their best work instead of just surviving the week. And the good news is when you actually know where to look, you can find some amazing, inspiring examples of people doing things differently, where both people and performance thrive. And so when we work that way, work becomes more energizing, more human, and more meaningful than what many people experience today. So that's my mission, to make the world of work a better place and really make a difference.
So much to unpack. I knew you were going to derail this really quickly in the best way, but I knew you were going to do that in the best way possible. It was so good. I want to dig into what you just mentioned then, how leadership has still got quite an archaic train of thought in the way that it should be done and run. You could extrapolate that out to the current economy, right? Where, there is still this notion of breadwinner, stay at home person, setup of that sort of nature, which we all know now it's just simply not achieved. Like 2 incomes is pretty much a have to do, and yet when I'm thinking about my experiences at the minute with my children's school, and you would have gone through it as well, being a mother of 3 yourself. There is that expectation from educational systems, for example, that we are supposed to have that free time to be able to do A, B, C, D, all the bloody letters of the alphabet, because we're retired, we actually go get a job that pays the bills so that school can keep running, right? It's a really interesting concept. 100%. That's where we're going to start the show. Cherie, I have this belief when it comes to the notion of success that it's split into a few parts, success, connection, influence, and happiness. And one cannot survive without the other. They all sort of live in a bit of an ecosystem where they are all very much reliant on one another in order to rock and roll. Really interested to hear your take on this. So, Cherie Mylordis, what is your definition of a successful human?
For me, a successful human is someone who actually knows what matters to them and has the courage to live in alignment with it. So they're not chasing status or someone else's definition of success, but they're actually continuing to grow and learn and help others grow too in the direction of something that really matters to them. Because I think real success combines ambition with humanity, and that's what makes it sustainable, not exhausting. How's that?
Oh, ambition with humanity. That's a new one.
There you go.
That's a new one. Ambition with
Mm.
humanity. I like that one.
Well,
I
because,
like that one
when
a
you
lot.
really care about something, it fuels you. And that is
Mm.
why purpose and really knowing what matters to you, that's the antidote to burnout, right? Because you can work super hard on something that matters to you and be energized. But when you work super hard and long hours on something that drains you, that's when you're depleted. That's when you burn out.
Oh, Cherie, and I say this with all the love in the world. You've given me a headache because now I've got about 17 different ways that we could go with this.
Still got plenty of time. We can
This is
dive
going to be
into
meant.
some rabbit holes.
This is going to be absolutely meant. I'm going to love this conversation. And I wanted to ask though, from your personal experience, did you have was there a sliding doors moment, or was there a period in your life where you realized this for yourself? Because I think this sort of notion of ambition with humanity, having something that means something to you in order to then help you to kick on, right? And I am an embodiment of that, one could say, because the amount of stuff that I do, the amount of output that I have, so many people tend to worry about how much I'm doing. Am I burning out? And I'm like, nah, man, like I'm rocking and rolling. This is me having fun.
Yeah.
For you, was there a period in your life though that where you realized this for yourself? Because a lot of the time, the hardest person to convince about this sort of stuff is ourselves, right?
Yeah.
So was there a moment in your time, because you've got a load of tickets on
Mm,
your docket,
mm,
right, with regards to experience and stuff in a really, really cool
mm.
way. So was there a moment for you?
There was. And maybe just to take you to how I got there, I am the first person in my family to go to university. So, and probably even to finish like year 12. So I'm a Kiwi. I've got a Kiwi mum. I've got an Aussie dad, and we lived in New Zealand, and then we moved to Australia. So we moved a few times. So I didn't really have those sort of lifelong childhood friends, and I didn't have any role models. But I seemed to do okay at school, so I felt like I needed to go to uni. So that set me on a path of really trying to learn from others. I was always curating. I was always noticing everybody else to learn. So I got myself into consulting, but then I got what I thought was the job of my dreams in my late 20s, which was the Sydney Olympic Games. So yeah, I knew you'd love this one, being into sport.
Big time.
And I was actually, whilst I was so excited, and I remember screaming down the phone to my mum, telling her I got this job, I was actually terrified because I was in the strategy team. I was number 52 of a team of 1,500 employees and 50,000 volunteers. And here am I in the strategy team, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I've never even been to an Olympic Games. How on earth am I going to be one of a handful of people that puts the strategy together? So it was pretty terrifying. But what happened was we were a bunch of Olympic rookies that just came together, rolled our sleeves up, and figured it out. So that was the defining moment. And it took me a long time. It took me until only a few years ago to really have all of this click as to what was that moment and why it shaped everything I do since. And that is because, firstly, we had this bold purpose, right? So bringing people from 200 countries together, athletes to compete, and all of the spectators and all of the officials, that is purpose on a platter, right? It's handed to you. Like, you're going to put on this big thing. It's the biggest event in the world at that time, in that moment. It's the biggest event going on anywhere in the world. It's got a fixed date. So in many projects, the date changes, the funding changes. It's like, no, it's happening on the 15th of September 2000. And the world is watching. So that changed our whole way of showing up, right? Because we knew it was happening on that date. But what happened inside that organization? Of course, there's lots of politics. There's external politics and internal politics. There were some people that weren't great bosses or leaders, but all in all, we had a lot of autonomy. We were given permission. It's like, go for it, figure it out. Because we weren't given any playbooks or procedures or operating manuals. We were given the contract, but we weren't actually given anything to help us with how. So we just had to figure it out. I was very fortunate. I was actually leading a team of 100 people that we sent to Atlanta to go and observe their games before it was our turn. And we learned a lot. And we had to be very disciplined in how we collected the information and then how we brought it back and processed it. But essentially, we had purpose, we had autonomy, we had permission from the executives. They're like, we'll help deal with all the protocol, the politics, the local government, the state government, the federal government, the International Olympic Committee, all the sports, like layer upon layer of politics, right? But they said, just figure it out. So we were able to collaborate, not just internally, but with agencies and bodies outside of the organization to get this thing done. And so we weren't constrained by that hierarchy that you see in a lot of organizations, by that org chart and by that job description. Just stick to your job description and stay in your lane. We had that permission to do what needed to be done to deliver this amazing event, right? And so that's it's really purpose, it's autonomy, and then it's conditions to work together and do your best work. That's what it came down to. And that's why I've never been able to think about work the same way since, because going back into the corporate world, into that more rigid structure, you can then see the constraints and you can feel it and you can see how other people are constrained as well.
Oh, man. How was that? Because that would have been such a high.
Yeah.
Right? Seeing that all come together and play out the way it played out, and
Yeah.
I think to this day, it's widely regarded as one of the most successful Olympics ever put together.
It is.
One of the most enjoyable, one of the most well set up. I mean, you think about, how much, like, bad press is coming from various Olympic villages these days and all that sort of stuff, whereas Sydney just rocked and rolled, and everybody seemed to just have a party for a period of a few weeks, right? So,
We had a lot of bad press in the lead up. We honestly did, because everyone was looking for the bad stories, but it just came together. We were so lucky with the
it
weather and so many factors, but it was very well organized and planned. We had
no,
an
it was no,
amazing team.
fabulous. Because I hadn't come over here, so I personally hated you lot because you kept winning everything. And I'm British. We're supposed to not like everybody when it comes to sport because we're never any good. But how did you cope with that come down from such a
Mm,
pinnacle that you had spent?
right.
How long were you in that Olympic
Mm.
set for in the build up? How many years were you in the build up for?
It was over 5 years I worked there.
So how did you handle that when it had all been done? Because you can
Yeah.
relate this to, and I'm not wishing to oversimplify it, but you
Mm,
can relate this to those moments when you spend however long looking to achieve a goal. You set a goal, and then you get to that peak of a mountain, and you just go, "Is that it?"
yeah.
Like, or you go, "What's next?" How did you handle that?
Mm. Well, it was actually a really big issue that we looked at from a perspective of the workforce. So I'm one of the architects of the volunteer program. There were 3 of us that actually designed how are we going to recruit and lead 50,000 volunteers and make sure they had an amazing experience. Now, what we learnt when we went to Atlanta was there was this big big cliff that people almost felt was ahead of them after the games, because they did this amazing thing. They worked on the best event in the world. It was a life-changing experience. And so then for a lot of people, it was like, well, what's next? What could possibly follow this? And to be honest, there were some suicides as a result of Atlanta
Mm.
amongst even volunteers, because they were giving their time to something and then they just didn't know what was next. So we were very mindful of that when we looked at the planning of the games workforce. How are we going to build it up and how we were going to transition people out of it once the games was over? So we were very intentional about helping people with thinking about what's next. For the volunteers, for example, we had an arrangement with TAFE New South Wales because they were our partner in the training environment. So we gave people this passport, which enabled them to log all the training and all their experience. And TAFE was going to give them recognition of prior learning. So they could take that learning and then apply it as a stepping stone towards something they did next. We helped all of our employees we actually recruited people in to lead this whole piece about workforce transition. So how are we going to help people set themselves up for work and life after the games? So I guess that was something we were looking at holistically as part of the whole games workforce. And so for me, I actually, just because I wasn't busy enough, Andy, my 2 daughters were born while I was working at the Olympics.
Yep. Yep.
So I was actually looking forward to a slightly less intense work environment for a little while after that. My son came along a year after that. So I had 3 very young children. My husband had his own business. So I spent a number of years working with him and helping him, and to have that flexibility to raise our young family, be a part of the community, and be involved with their world. But then stepping back into the corporate world, that's when I felt quite unsettled. And I can see now it was because I was back in those constraints. I was back in a more rigid hierarchy. I was back in an environment where there was that command and control, top down, decisions at the top, delegating instructions down the hierarchy, and very much feeling like, well, you're here to do this job. Don't put your hand up. Don't show initiative. And that felt really stifling for me. But it wasn't just me. I noticed that so many other people that I was working with seemed that they weren't really engaged or fulfilled at work either. And I could see that they weren't fulfilling their potential. So that's what led to me feeling like, well, who else is working in this more audacious or more progressive way? And I started following organizations around the world that were leading differently. And that opened up this extraordinary level of insights into what can be achieved when you lead differently. Yeah.
I think there's a couple of things to unpack there. The first one is that you managed to process that sort of unsettled energy and then direct it towards something tremendously productive, right? Which is really
Yeah.
good. You see so
Yeah.
many people in work or life where that unsettled level of sort of almost a kinetic energy sort of creates a bit of a chain reaction, which leads to some destructive behavior a lot of the time, right?
Yes.
You probably see that more than you do the former, don't you?
Well, you
Where
do. Yeah.
it's almost like a pushback or a fight back or a resistance of some description, right? That whole cog in a machine thing is something that, coming from the UK, I actually feel really does hold so much of the UK population back, because that's really how I was brought up. The only reason why I'm sat here talking to you is because I got out of the UK, essentially.
Yeah.
And for as much as I, love being from there, the way that it's set up, it's not set up for people to grow and thrive and be the best version of themselves in many respects. So did you have a moment where, I mean, and I guess, becoming a mom and having the ticket to the best seats, best show in the world, which is seeing your kids grow and all that sort of stuff, that would have given you a bit of perspective, I'm sure. But surely there was a part of you, Cherie, that when you first got into that real cog in a machine constrictive environment, you must have had a bit of an allergic reaction to it
Yeah.
initially, surely.
Yeah, I did. And I think that's why I changed jobs every sort of year and a half, 2 years once I got back into
Yeah.
the corporate world, because I got to a point where I felt, oh, I really can't add much more value here. And I was sort of reading the tea leaves and thinking, this isn't really on a good trajectory. Or, okay, I've delivered the value that I can. It's time to move on to something else. So I seem to find myself in a space of emerging things were happening. So I was at the forefront of agile in some of the biggest banks. And then that design thinking was coming in. And then I found myself at the forefront of innovation and some of these sort of corporate boot camps where they would run teams and get them to think differently inside organizations. So I think I just sort of got to a point where I was like, oh, I'm reaching my use by date here. I think it's time to explore something else. And was I think a combination of that curiosity and wanting to get out of my own comfort zone every time, but also a bit of luck came into it as well, and just finding myself in these new environments. And I think that's, whilst I'm quite a, you know, going back to my childhood, I was pretty shy and I was, quite introverted. But I think because I didn't have any role models, I had to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. I was always a little bit out of my comfort zone, forging new ground, and didn't have any role models. And so I think that's sort of what I kept going after time and time again. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
It kind of no, it does, and I think what you've sort of helped me to stumble across in term with that response is that because what we're finding is, amount of time that someone spends in a role has shrunk dramatically, right?
Yeah.
The amount of time that people spend in any one particular role within a workforce or within a business or a company or whatever,
Mm,
it's diminishing tremendously,
mm,
right? And then
yeah.
from a leadership perspective, that creates a real challenge in terms of making sure you've got that constant sort of flow of talent coming through your organization because of the fact that,
Mm,
you've got these people that, you know, do get itchy feet for want of a better word, right? And want to move somewhere else. But can we put that though to just based on your experiences there, can we suggest then that for leaders to create some degree of loyalty, there needs to be that sense that for the individual that you are employing, there needs to be a sense to them that they are bringing value in who they are to the organization, right? Which goes
mm,
beyond a machine
mm,
thing. It goes
mhm.
beyond an asset thing and turns into something a bit more, right?
Yeah,
So and this sort of it sort of segues us in tremendously into the first part of what we want to talk about in terms of the evolution of leadership in organizations and whatnot, because
yeah,
um, especially when we look at when we sort of cross reference that with the way in which different generations are motivated these days and so on and so forth, because we had in our conversation we had prior to this when we talked about some of the challenges that Zeds and Alphas are really starting to face with that. Could
yeah.
we argue then that you were almost like a precursor to
Mm.
what is a lot more problematic in a lot of these structures these days?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Historically, people would be in a role for a lot longer.
Mm,
But I think now it's become a lot more normal that people will not only change jobs more often, they will change careers more often. And with the
mm,
Gen Z cohort, the people in their sort of is into, and even into the millennials into their 30s, that is far more what they want. That's their appetite because they want variety, they want fulfillment, they want to have, I guess, more of a lattice career rather than the ladder. In the past, it was the ladder. You just had to get on the bottom rung and climb straight up, and it was very
mhm,
clear whether you were in banking or, you know, accounting or real estate or whatever, right? There was kind of an entry level, and then you just had to work your way up. Well, that's not what the world of work looks like anymore, and that's not what will fulfill us. And, we spend on average 90,000 hours of our life at work. And so there's a quote that I love, which is the way we spend our days is, in fact, the way we spend our lives. Annie Dillard, a
love that.
writer, said that, right? And so what the way you spend your 8 or so hours every day at work impacts your whole life. Because if you have a shitty day, you've got a
Mm,
bad boss who's micromanaging you, or you're just doing work that's not very fulfilling, that then translates into the way you feel about your life because you take that home, you take that stress and that frustration home with you, and it all
mm,
rubs off, right? And so, yeah, I think it's about normalizing it. So, right now, leaders need to understand and accept that people want a variety. But how might you help cultivate that, right? Because if people feel like they're working towards something significant, and if they are always learning and growing, then you could keep them for longer within that organization, right? You could give them different opportunities to learn and grow and evolve. Again, not the ladder, but the lattice. And so there might be all sorts of ways that you can attract and retain them. And even if they want to go and do a side hustle or go and travel or go and explore something else, if you're really clever about how you not only onboard people, but offboard people, keep the door open, keep the conversations open. They might come back in a few years enriched and fulfilled and have other value to add that's good for both of you, right? So this Gen Z cohort, they're going to be a 30% slice of the workforce by 2030. That's only 4 years away. Now, we need to understand them. They don't want to just be on that ladder and become a boss and boss people around doing what they're currently doing. They want purpose-driven work. They want growth. They want, enrichment. They want to explore, right? And so companies that understand that and can tap into that can actually create a win-win situation. So I think there's so much to explore. There's so many opportunities. So this isn't about following the crowd and how we're going to just do everything more efficiently using AI. This is about how do we think differently and how do we become that leader or that organization that people would actually do anything to work for, right? I want to work for that leader. I want to work for that company. That's the goal here, right?
Oh, 100%, man. And you've just mentioned AI briefly, and we won't go into it in too much detail, but the
No.
simple fact is that what AI is eradicating is the excuse of not having enough time to spend on this stuff, right? Because,
Yeah.
everybody's banging on about efficiencies when you can be as efficient as you want, but if your outcome's rubbish, what's the point in being dead efficient if your outcome's no good? And unless you are working completely autonomous in your own business where it's just you and a whole load of chatbots and AI machines and stuff like that, you're gonna need to have a human focus in order to affect the outcome in a positive way. And it really segues wonderfully into the question I was really keen on asking you, which is, you know, as we can all deduce now, success is different in everybody's eyes, right? And
Yeah.
within an organization, one of the forever challenges, shall we say, is for leaders to one, recognize that success does look different for each individual team member that you've got. But at the same time, it's how you can turn those different versions of success into a symphony that heads towards the success of the organization, right? Which is that
Yeah.
spearhead thing. So
Yeah.
as people evolve and as people's motivations evolve and whatnot, Cherie, how can leaders really keep that blend together? Because one of the challenges that comes with having this greater level of diversity in terms of focuses and motivations and things like that is that ultimately it all just sort of diverges away from the original company purpose, right? Or the original
Yeah.
business or the original team purpose or whatever. So what things can leaders do these days or now that helps them to sort of facilitate that blending of everybody's versions of success into that one sort of North Star?
Well, so this is perhaps a good time to introduce my simple model. And so I
Mm,
believe that the future of work is to work in 3D. And what 3D means is it's the three traits that I see time and time again that these extraordinary organizations and leaders embody. So the 3Ds stand for dare, ditch, and dial. Now, this 3D ethos, you can actually apply it in the smallest possible bubble. You can apply it to yourself, you can apply it to your team, or you can apply it to the whole organization, right? So you don't need sort of authority to bring this in. You can start from wherever you are. So if you're a current leader, how might you connect the work that you're doing to the bigger picture, to whatever purpose? What does your organization stand for? Now, if that's not clear, then that's, I think, something to try and influence, because this would be holding back the entire organization and their people if they're not super clear on what they stand for. And, this can be turned around in a few executive workshops. So I've seen this happen where if you get the executive team behind it and take them through some thought-provoking questions and some discussion, some really intentional discussion, you can get that buy-in. So if there is a bigger picture as to why the organization exists, then lean into that. Try and connect the work that you're doing to that bigger picture. That's the first thing, because that starts to build that intrinsic motivation, okay? So that's the dare piece. And for individuals, what do you care about and how might that connect to what the organization cares about? If you can find any synergies there, that again unlocks that motivation, that meaning in your work. it gets you out of bed because you want to show up and contribute towards that thing that is important, right? So the dare. The ditch is to be open to looking at what is slowing us down. So yes, we've got all these tools coming in to try and make things more efficient, but what are the things that are really slowing us down and stopping us from delivering value? Maybe there's just these long-winded processes that's the way we've already done this thing, but maybe we don't need to do it that way anymore. And it's more than just technology. It might be approval points. It might be, just some processes. So what is it that's slowing us down? Do we need all those meetings in our calendar? Should we be replying all of our emails? Are there better ways to communicate, right? So really taking a good hard look at what's going on, how are we spending our time, and what is actually taking us away from the core of that purpose or that value that we're trying to deliver here. If you've got a leader that is open to that and creates situations where people can contribute, that makes an enormous difference. And then the third piece is dial. So how do we dial up better ways of working? Leaders need to show up more as coaches, not managers. Coming back to your sporting analogy, right? If we can coach people to perform well, give them guidance, give them the outcome. Here's what we're trying to get to. Give them that opportunity to influence how that happens, as opposed to being more instructive or directional, okay? That is a game changer. So you're there to guide and support, but you're not dictating every single micro step, okay? You're giving people permission to figure it out and to collaborate with others, and that makes an enormous difference. So coming back to the 3Ds, you can apply that at any level, and that really does start to shift things and elevate things in the right direction. Does that make sense?
I love that. I think yeah. I mean, one example of it is probably something that you mentioned when you were looking at the consequences of not having a succession plan for your people, when you talked about how you put together for the after the hearing about the problems that some of the volunteers had in Atlanta, you brought in this passport that enabled people to see to be able to see the benefits for their future, right? You put that passport together that allowed them to see that after this, what you're doing now, not only is it bringing you value now, but it's actually bringing you value down the track as well, that post this, you're going to be able to then go forth and conquer, right? In whatever it is you want to do, whether it's TAFE and prior learning and stuff. And I think that's a really damn good example of how you guys dialed in to not just the current challenges of that workforce, of that volunteership, but also the future concerns of that group of people, right?
Yeah.
What am I going to do after this, right? What's left for me after? Because one thing that we talked about briefly in our conversation, which is so true and it's very pertinent to this point, is that a lot of us like to contribute to something that's bigger than ourselves.
Yeah.
Right? We like to have that greater sense of belonging to something that is greater than than we are, right? And bringing that passport in it really does highlight, or it should highlight for anybody that's leading teams that's listening to this, that everybody talks about personal development, professional development in workforces and things like that. I dare say that over the last few years, we've become that distracted with external forces that professional development piece might not be overly focused on as much as what it perhaps once was. But I think it goes a little step beyond that, because yes, we need to be able to make them feel like they are bringing value to the organization, but it's always a case of us helping them to feel like we're bringing value to them, not just for the now, because if we live too much in the present, then the second it doesn't go quite right is the second that they disconnect, right? But if we can help them to see value both for the now and their future selves as well, then we create an opportunity where we create that level of longevity, which is all part of that last D. Now, when it comes to the first D, dare, right? I would like to dig into that. I like that word, dare, and I think it sort of leans into perhaps a challenge that we've got around, because of the consequence of our reliance on AI and whatnot from a creative standpoint as well, right? Because daring to do something means that you are being creative in your thinking in terms of how you could do things differently. And
Yeah.
that is something that we've seen via MRI scans and studies and whatnot is diminishing in human beings, right? So
Yeah.
from a dare perspective,
Mm.
that and the whole keeping up with the Joneses, which
Yeah.
is so prominent in today's society. How dare we step out of the beaten track sort of thing, which is
Mm.
ironic when you consider that we don't like being cogs in a machine, and yet.
Mm.
Uh,
Mm.
um, Talk to me about that dare piece, Cherie.
Mm.
Like, from your perspective, when you're working with leaders and whatnot, how have you helped them to sort of cultivate not only the abilities or the capabilities, but also the courage to show a bit of daring in their endeavors?
So, yeah, well, I actually run sessions called Define Your Dare. And so I do that with teams or with organizations to really say, well, what would you do if you couldn't fail?
Mm,
And what we know is that if you have something that is so important to you, it might even feel impossible, but it's worth going after. Um, it it gives everyone that rallying cry. It gives people that North Star. I'll give you an example. I do some voluntary pro bono work for a charity called Odyssey House, New South Wales. I'm on an executive committee and I help them in various ways. Now, Odyssey House does drug and alcohol rehabilitation very successfully for people in the community. And, as we know, addiction does not discriminate. You can be at
mm,
any end of the of the socioeconomic spectrum, and you could be struggling with addiction, right? They do these extraordinary programs. They're both residential and community based. Now, Odyssey House, New South Wales, there's about 150 people that work there. Many of them are actual former graduates, so they come back around and they can give that lived experience to their clients. Now, their vision, it actually counts to me as a purpose statement. Their vision is a world free of addiction. Now, that 150 people that shows up every day, passionate about helping people overcome their addiction and helping their families and their communities as well, they're probably never going to actually achieve that purpose of a world free of addiction, right?
mm,
But that inspires how they show up. That inspires not only the way they work, but how they share proven techniques with others, and they're part of other peak bodies, and they speak about it, they write about it. And so I think it's a wonderful example of a purpose that feels impossible, but it's worth doing. And if you achieve 10% of that, you haven't failed, have you? Right? You've still done something meaningful.
mm,
So when you're actually able to articulate something that is worth going after that almost feels impossible, that's where you can bring in that opportunity to be creative because, well, it's so crazy, it's so radical. There's no way we could get there if we just do what we're currently doing. So it actually
mm,
prompts people to think really differently. So if you dial up the impact you want to create and you dial in the time frame, so you're trying to achieve this almost impossible thing in a short period of time, that really gets people thinking differently and creatively, right? So these are just
interesting.
little levers you can use to sort of create this healthy tension, if you like, that gives people something to really think about and go after. And you might be amazed what ideas come up when you just play with those two levers.
I love that. If I can ask though, right? So as
Mm.
you've been working with leaders, because I think we spend so much time and energy on looking at data now. We've become so analytically driven as a society almost without trying to sound too, hippie about it. But
Yeah.
like we've become so focused on numbers
Mm.
and attention and things like of that nature that you could argue that we are spending so much time focusing on data in the past to even worry about having faith in the future, right? So that thus preventing us from advancing in certain ways, right?
Mm.
However, for a lot of leaders, having that balance, understanding the mix between the two, because you can't just be all bloody head in the clouds either, right? Because there's a P&L to answer to, and whether it is addiction or mental health challenges or all those sorts of things, there are
Mm.
certain realities in life that can't be ignored, like bills being paid and all
Yeah,
those sorts of
of
things.
course. Of course.
So how do we make that balance between daring and delivering almost? It's almost like that sort of balance, the daring versus the delivering.
Yeah.
How either you personally,
Mm.
or how do you help others to shape that real healthy mix of the two?
Great question. So what I typically do is, you have that bigger picture of why we exist, but then you zoom in on what's a problem we'd like to solve right now that would take us in the direction of that bigger audacious goal, right? But you make that problem juicy. It's like, okay, we've got this juicy problem. Now, what I find is in difficult times like we're in right now, where there's a lot of pressure on leaders, what I find is the instinct is for leaders to go, okay, I'll just protect my team from all that noise. I'll deal with all the pressure from above and all the problems I've got to solve. And I'll just keep it really simple for my team because they've got too much going on, and I'll just tell them what I need them to do. That's actually the wrong thing to do. The right thing to do is to actually involve your team in going, okay, we've got this challenge, team. This is what we need to try and crack, right? This is the problem we need to solve. This is what our executives are looking at us to achieve. Let's get together and explore and ideate and think about how we might do it. And then you want to set up a bit of a cadence. So you want to have maybe set a monthly goal of what you're trying to go after, have, daily quick check-ins, and show up as that coach and invite the team to sort of come back to you weekly with, well, here's what we've come up with. And then you give them feedback. So what you want to do is you want to have what I call a pact. You want to have a problem that you want to go after, and you want to have some kind of accountability, right? Where teams have to come back. People have to come back to you with something, right? You bring in some coaching. So you're guiding them, you're supporting them, you're giving them fast feedback. And then you've got a bit of a tempo, right? And that tempo is quite intense, right? When you do that, it's actually amazing what happens, because you're giving people fast feedback in real time. So that's actually normalizing feedback. You're not waiting till, performance reviews or one-on-ones. You're normalizing that sort of coaching style feedback. You're giving people something really juicy and meaningful, and you're giving them permission to work on it without being too prescriptive. So if leaders can just change the way they work with their teams to bring in some of that, you might be surprised who comes up with ideas. It might not be who you're thinking. It might not be someone with a certain level in the hierarchy. It might just be someone who's just wants to crack this. And I've seen apprentices, when I was working in Qantas, I saw apprentices work in their garage and tinkering away at solving a problem that was to do with a configuration inside an aircraft. And then they came and presented it. And the best thing was the general manager of engineering saw that these two young apprentices were really keen to solve problems. Do you know what he did to reward them? This is genius. He sent them on a trip to Airbus in France to go and see what happens over there. Now that's going to cultivate more of an appetite to learn and be involved, right? So rewarding initiative with an opportunity to learn more and see something even more inspirational is a brilliant way to respond when you see someone show that initiative. So if you're creating these conditions where's a problem, how are we going to hold ourselves accountable for coming up with something, coaching them, and then that tempo, that sort of quite tight time frame, that creates a little bit of energy and intensity that actually creates an environment that people step into and deliver. You get this incredible adrenaline and motivation that I see. I've seen this happen so many times. It's a really powerful thing for leaders to do. Yeah, so that's something I'd recommend.
One challenge that I hear a heck of a lot, which I'd like to challenge you with what you just said there. Leaders are really struggling to tap into any level of real motivation at the minute for a lot of people. That word is something that, they're trying all the cliched stuff. They're trying financial incentives. They're trying all sorts of stuff, right? Create some level of motivation. I'm not going to ask you what you would recommend, right? I want to ask you slightly differently by asking for your take on what do you feel it is that is missing, or what do you feel are the bits that are missing more often than not when it comes to that motivational piece? Is it part recruitment? Is it part just a complete lack of understanding as to give us your sort of bits so you're missing elements, because we hear plenty of people talking about how to motivate your teams, but I dare say that until we recognize where we're lacking, we really struggle to find the right solution. So what do you think are the missing bits most commonly?
I think managers, if I can put it, if I can define it in terms of managers, I think managers often default to the way they've been managed.
Mm.
Historically, coming back to this more traditional way of running organizations, right? The expectation of a manager is you're the one that has to tell everyone what to do. You're the boss. The term boss is, it just says it all, right? You boss people around, you tell them what to do. That is not how you bring out the best in people. And I've actually come up with, I wanted to make this a little bit fun in terms of how I shine a light on this. So I actually came up with these 5 bad boss archetypes.
Nice.
And the reason why I did that was because I want to help people sort of self-reflect and go, am I one of those? But also to help people if they're dealing with someone who is not really bringing out the best in them. Well, are they one of these 5 archetypes? And then I can help you deal with that. So do you want to know what they are?
Yeah, big time. I've just got visions of that film Horrible Bosses coming up, which is just what I think it's one of my favorites and just hilarious.
Yeah.
But hopefully the 5 aren't any of those 3. Let's put it that way. Anyway, go for it.
No, I don't. I made them up. But, I think, again, I'm not saying these are bad people. They're just taking on these archetypes that are probably how they were bossed around in the past, right? So the first one is the ghost boss. So they're kind of absent most of the time, and then they appear right when they need to either take credit or blame someone. So that's the ghost boss. They're just never really there to help you, and you're feeling in the dark. The next one is the glitter bomb fairy. So they're full of great ideas, lots of sparkle, lots of great ideas, but there's no follow through. And you feel like you're constantly having to deal with their next big idea and their next big idea. So there's a lot of overwhelm, and there's a lot of unclear priorities. And you're like, well, which one am I supposed to work on next with these glitter bombs going off all the time? The next one is what I call the default yes manager. They just say yes to everything. So they're, let's just saying yes to their superiors. And then the team's got to try and figure out how to deliver all these yeses. So that leads to real overload and unrealistic expectations of the team. The next one I love, it's called the hovercraft. I see a lot of this. It's that micromanager. They're constantly on your shoulder. Where is it? Where is it? They're, micromanaging everything. And you feel like you're completely almost suffocated by them because they're onto you all the time. It's like, just give me some space and let me work on this, right? And then the final one, which I see in certain sectors a lot, is what I call the ringmaster. So overwork and burnout is almost like a trophy. You're supposed to work till 2 a.m. every night, and of course you can order in your dinner and Uber home, but you really don't have much of a life. And that's just the expectation in this role. So there's, financial analysts, people in consulting, I see a lot of this. So what I wanted to do was sort of shine a light on, these are 5 typical archetypes of what I call the bad bosses. So I want to encourage people to actually self-reflect and go, am I showing up in this way? But also, if I'm working for someone who actually is showing up in this way, what can you do? Now, in each of these situations, there are things you can do. And I've actually curated tools, specific tools that can help you. So I'll give you an example. Like if you've got this ghost boss, right, who sort of drops the work on you and then they're never there to give you any further clarity. Well, there's a really simple tool you can use called a reverse brief, right? So as soon as they drop something at you, and even if it's super vague or they forward an email and then go, can you run with this? And you're like, what am I supposed to do with this? I created this template called a reverse brief where within like an hour or 2, you can go back to them and go, okay, here's what I've heard from you. And I've just got some nice headings to go, well, what's the scope? Who am I supposed to deal with? Where am I supposed to get the information from? And then you go and do a playback and go, here's what I've heard. And then they'll see that they've actually got some gaps in what they've told you as well. And you're saying, well, I could go about it this way. Am I on the right page? Are we on the same page? Right? So very quickly, within an hour or 2, you can actually go back to them, do a playback, and have a meaningful conversation to go, okay, where are the gaps? Are we on the right page? Let's go forward with clarity. And you can use that even for the hovercraft, right? And go, okay, let's replay this. Let's make sure we're on the right page. And then, okay, let's check in for 15 minutes a day. Rather than just them, hovering over your shoulder all the time, you can start to subtly change the dynamics so that you're kind of managing them without them realizing it. So there's these stealthy ways. So I've got a whole bunch of tools that I have curated to help people deal with these bad bosses by either unbossing themselves or unbossing their boss.
I love that. Now, before I let you go, there's a couple of questions I wanted to ask. As it pertains to success, you mentioned there that instead of having people be led, you are suggesting that they more be coached rather than led, right?
Yes.
The thing that popped into my head from a feedback loop perspective when I've been going into certain teams is that sometimes that can create a little bit of a situation where you got plenty of chefs and not enough cooks in
Yeah.
that regard, right? Now, how can leaders, again, and it is that real tightrope of a trip where you've got to, keep everybody heading towards the other end of the rope, but or whilst not feeling that they've got nowhere else to go, right?
Mm.
How for leaders that are really struggling with that, where they're seeing that as soon as they give them their players a bit more freedom to sort of spread their wings a little bit, there then comes that fear, that inherent twitch of, well, shit, they're going to leave soon because they're this good, or you know what I mean? Like, is
Yeah.
it that fear of having people leave, which is preventing a lot of leaders from wanting to develop some of this talent, right?
Mm.
How can we get over that and make sure that these chefs are very much in line with what you're trying to serve up?
I love this question. I think there's two parts to it. The first thing I would advise every leader is to understand their own strengths and their team's strengths.
Mm,
Now, there's some really good tools that help you do that. There's one I use that I'm happy to give people access to, where you can tap into 31 competencies and learn people's top 8 innate strengths.
mm,
Now, if you know your strengths and if you know your team's strengths, then it's like, well, how do we help people lean into what they're good at, what comes naturally, what's easy for them that might be hard for others? So start there, because that helps people do what they enjoy. If it comes naturally and they're good at it, they usually enjoy it, right? So you want to play to that. The next thing is actually ask people about their ambition. Like, what would doing the best work of your life mean for you? What is your ambition? And offer, counseling or coaching on how might they take that next step in that journey. So
mm,
by being a little bit selfless and by showing that interest in what people's goals are and supporting them and enabling them to do that, you might help them see opportunities within the organization. There might be a little initiative that's coming up that you hear about that you think, oh, Andy'd be great at that. Like maybe he could get involved in that as a sort of 20% of his time and still work with me 80% of the time. So try not to think of it in terms of, oh, I just need to keep people in my team and keep them working for me, but how might you help them grow and learn and thrive? Because that helps you deliver value to the organization. It might change the way you lead and opportunities for you as well. And so I think there's only upside in that. If you
mm.
come from a place of just that sort of fear and control, it doesn't go well. You've really got to flip that. And again, it might feel counterintuitive, but that brings loyalty and that might open up all sorts of opportunities that you can't see yet for both you, your team, and these people.
Yeah,
Yeah, does that make
I
sense?
think, yeah, totally. And I feel that I think the first thing that any of us can do when we're heading towards a level of success for the organization or for ourselves or for whatever is learning to let go of that absolute, right? Where, I think learning to let go of that is probably the first hurdle that I think a lot of leaders tend to face. But
Mm.
again, I'm just thinking about that passport that you put together for the volunteers, which I think is such a tremendous example. And I'm thinking
Mhm.
about some of the crews that I'm working with at the minute, where people have gone off to do their own thing, and that's and it's at the detriment of the current organization, but then because there's not been that sort of passport-esque mentality within
Yeah,
the business, it's actually led to the individual making so many costly, detrimental, devastating in some instances mistakes, whether it be it financially, operationally, or whatever, where
mhm.
they've gone ahead and bitten off so much that they can't even get it in the mouth, let alone chew it,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah,
so that sort of double-edged negative sort of sword
Mm,
It's not only do you give yourself less of a chance to keep them, it
mm,
actually causes more damage on the other end for both sides anyway, because no one wins in those scenarios, right? That
absolutely.
you're down a productive team member, they go off and end up completely ballsing up their life, which is never a good thing to see.
Yeah,
You
that's right.
know, and it's and no one wins.
That's right.
Uh, no one
Exactly
wins.
right. So I think just to sort of boil all this down, what I would say to your audience is try and get really clear on your purpose and your strengths first. And then don't wait until you feel ready for that next thing. If you see an opportunity, step into it and then figure it out as you go. And also, rather than that voice in your head about, all the things that could go wrong, that inner critic, really tap into that inner mentor. Like, what would my future self tell me? What would, even a role model do? So channel something else, but mentor yourself, coach yourself. Don't feel like you need to wait for somebody else to do it. And
Mm.
know that you have value. If you can show up with intention, with integrity, and with curiosity, that will take you further than you think. And if you bring that ethos to both yourself and the people that you work with, your team will start to have a bit of an X factor and people will start to go,
Mm.
what's going on over there? Something feels a bit different and it will just start to
Mm.
cultivate and evolve. So
I
those are
love
my
that.
key tips.
I love that. I love that. So I really, really, and I would actually add another tip that Cherie's been so kind to get kind enough to give us, which is I'd actually look at I'd do a monthly 3D check-in as well,
Yeah,
and go, right, what can we dare to do, what can we ditch, and where do we need to dial in to a better extent, and
absolutely.
I think that would be such a good habit to get into, whether you're a leader, whether you're an operator, whether you're just getting started,
Yes.
irrespective of where you sit in that lattice of work, not
Yes,
the ladder. Um, it's where you can dare ditch and dial in, and I
absolutely.
think that if we were to bring that on as a habit, that we sort of do on the regular, then I think that it would allow us an opportunity to, and I think because I think some people talk about, doing, SWOT analysis and performance reviews and those sorts of things, right? But
Mm,
they're just so impersonal. They're just not. They don't feel human
that's right.
almost,
That's
do they?
exactly right. If you started every month going, what do we dare? What could we ditch? And what could we dial up? And have a conversation about that, you might be amazed what you come up with. And you can start small. What's the smallest thing we could do? And
Yeah.
also, you don't often the things that you can come up with, you don't even need to ask for permission. You can do it within your bubble. And again, it'll start to feel different after a while.
And it's that aggregation of incremental gains. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be wholesale changes every
No,
time. It could be
no.
let's dare to just alter the wording on our EDM this month and
Yeah,
see how it changes feedback or reaction
exactly.
or
Yeah,
whatever,
little
right?
experiments. Love that.
I love that little experimental sort of side
Perfect.
to things, controlled experiments, and if you have an explosion, then it's controlled anyway, so it's not gonna be the end of the world. So I love that. I think that's amazing, Cherie. I really, really do. I really like that. It's so simple as well, which definitely appeals to simple people like myself. Now, before I let you go, one final question. This has been an absolute delight. I've just been sitting back and consuming. I love having these conversations where I've got someone just hand over fist, just delivering some amazing stuff with every sentence. But a bit of self-reflection as before I let you go, Cherie.
Mm,
You know, you are doing lots of consulting for lots of different people, but I'm
mm.
sure that you would be bringing you are a practice what you preach type of individual, and so I'm sure you would be doing that old dare ditch and dial up analysis on yourself on the regular. As you as you're looking forward at the minute, and the
Mm.
way that I ask this question is, what is the one thing that you are really focused on as you head towards the next version of success? But I guess if we were to sort of recalibrate that to the C Mylordis sort of train of thought, what is one thing that you are being a bit daring, or one thing that you're looking to take a chance to take a punt on? What is it?
Mm. I think it's being more open about my big audacious goal
Mm,
because and it comes back to something that might almost feel impossible. So I'll share it with you. And it's something I've only started saying out loud recently. But that is, imagine if globally no one wanted to work for an organization unless they said we work in 3D, right? Unless the organization said, we dare, we've got a bold purpose, up for ditching stuff, and we're prepared to dial up better ways of working, and we're prepared to give people permission to contribute. Imagine if that Gen Z cohort could go, well, I'm only seeking work with an organization that works in 3D. And imagine if organizations could say, yeah, we work in 3D, we're up for that, and demonstrate how we do it. So my big audacious goal is that there is a global movement where work in 3D means something, and that those old dinosaurs that just want to have that power and that status and that hierarchy, they become extinct because no one wants to work for them anymore.
I love it, man. What a great way to end this show. Seriously, Cherie Mylordis, you've been an absolute joy. You really, really have. I've enjoyed every single moment of this. It's been absolutely fabulous. And I can't thank you enough. And I think that big audacious goal, I reckon, is something that we could all perhaps have a think about. We are allowed to dream big, right? There's nothing stopping us from dreaming big. And then, what is it? You aim for the moon and miss, you're still going to hit something, right?
Totally.
So why the heck not? But I actually believe that this working 3D stuff, I think it's an evolution that the workforce is desperately in need of. So I am absolutely going to be flying that 3D flag for you. Don't you worry about that.
Thank you so much.
Look, Cherie, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us on the Success Curious podcast. It's been a proper delight. It really has.
It's been such a delight for me too. And your listeners are welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. Check out my website, check out my academy, Nextgenify Academy, where I've got all these tools that you can tap into. And I want it to be really accessible. For the price of a coffee a week, you can access this stuff because the world needs it. So happy to help.
Big time. And we'll be making sure that we put links to all of that stuff into the show notes, gang, so you won't have to go too far to go and find it. But on behalf of Cherie and myself, gang, oh man, I need to go away and sort of disseminate some of these notes, which I'm sure you will have to do as well. So go get a coffee on and give yourself a little moment to sort of consume some of the gold that's just come through this incredible human, Cherie Mylordis. Team, on behalf of Cherie and myself, stay safe, stay healthy, stay happy. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll catch up with you again on the next episode. Take care.